The first time my husband insulted me in Japanese, my wine glass actually trembled in my hand, and I had to smile like nothing was happening, because if I reacted, I'd lose everything. You know what I mean? We were sitting in the private omakase room at Kintsugi, the kind of place where the lighting makes everyone look richer than they are. The kind of place Ethan Ward loved, because it made him feel like the main character in a movie. Floor-to-ceiling windows, city lights glittering a server, moving like a ghost between courses, and across from us, Ishida, a Japanese investor, with that calm, unreadable face people get when they've seen too many men talk too much. This dinner was supposed to be Ethan's victory lap, one more polished moment, before his cybersecurity company WardShield went public, and I was there as the softening detail, the stable wife accessory that made him look grounded, respectable, safe. Ethan had his best suit on, that confident smile, that little laugh he uses when he thinks he's charming. And then he leaned toward Mr. Ishida and switched into perfect Japanese, casual as breathing. "She's sweet, but she's not bright. A pretty bracelet on my arm, nothing more." And he laughed like insulting your wife was just part of the entertainment package. My stomach went cold so fast it was almost impressive, like my body was trying to protect me by shutting down. And I remember staring at the tuna in front of me like it was suddenly the most interesting thing on earth, because the one thing I could not do was let my face change. Ethan didn't know I spoke Japanese, not because I hid it like some secret weapon, but because he never cared enough to ask 5 years of marriage, and the man couldn't tell you what I studied, what languages I learned, what I did when I wasn't standing next to him in photos. He knew my dress size and my event smile, that's about it, Mr. Ishida's eyes flicked to me for half a second, like he was checking whether I understood. Then he set his mouth in a polite line, and in Japanese he asked Ethan carefully, "And your assistant, the one you mentioned before?" Ethan didn't even hesitate. He grinned and said, "Sloane is everything. Alyssa isn't smart, ambitious, actually useful. We've been together almost 2 years. Alyssa suspects nothing. And I swear my heartbeat didn't race. It slowed like my body realized panic wouldn't help. So it switched into this weird, clear focus. 2 years. 2 years of me making his home run smoothly, hosting his dinners, learning the names of people who didn't matter to me, listening to him talk about building like I wasn't the one holding up half the scaffolding, and he was just casually telling a stranger that I was the dumb decoration he kept around for optics. "Mr. Ishida asked, still in Japanese, if your wife discovers this," and Ethan waved him off. "She won't, and even if she did prenup, she walks with a tiny payout. She'd be nobody without me for now. She's great for appearances. Once the launch hits, maybe I upgrade." And I took a slow sip of water, because if I lifted my wine, I might have dropped it, and I kept my lips curved in that pleasant little smile wives are trained into, the one that says, "I'm fine, I'm lucky, I'm grateful," while your insides are turning to ash. The worst part wasn't even the cheating. As insane as that sounds, it was the way he talked about me like I wasn't a person, like I was furniture he'd chosen and grown bored with, and the way he assumed I couldn't do anything about it, because he'd already decided who I was, and he was so comfortable in that fantasy, he didn't even bother to check if it was true. I sat through the rest of the dinner like I was watching my own life through glass, laughing once when it was expected, nodding politely, letting Ethan play his role, and every time he tossed another little Japanese comment over the table about how I must be bored, how I was probably thinking about shopping, I just smiled and chewed and acted exactly like the woman he imagined. Because the moment he believed I was just Alyssa, he got sloppy, and sloppy men leave evidence. When dessert came, Ethan switched back to English and draped his voice in fake affection. "Babe, we're going to the lounge after this. Why don't you head home? You look tired." Translation: get out so I can keep talking without worrying. You'll catch anything. And I stood smoothly, thanked Mr. Ishida, wished him a pleasant evening, and walked out with my head high, even though my hands felt like they didn't belong to me. In the parking garage, my phone buzzed with a text from Ethan. Home soon, love you. And I stared at the words. Love you, like they were written in another language because, yeah, that happened. And I didn't text back. I didn't go home either. I drove straight across town to my best friend Megan's apartment. Megan opened the door in sweatpants and a law hoodie hair in a messy bun, eyes half asleep, until she saw my face and she didn't do the dramatic gasp thing. She just stepped aside and said, "Okay, talk." So I told her quietly, at first, then faster, the Japanese, the insults, the affair, the prenup brag, and Megan's expression went from concerned to surgical, like her lawyer brain clicked into place. She grabbed a notepad and said, "Prenup, where our safe." Any clauses, and I swallowed and said, "Infidelity clause, my dad insisted on it. If he cheats, the prenup is void." Megan's eyes sharpened. Then we don't confront, not yet. We document emails, messages, hotel charges, dates, times, receipts, everything. She looked straight at me. "Can you stay calm?" And I surprised myself by answering, "I can." Because somewhere between that sushi course and that text message, something in me snapped. Not in an explosive way, in a cold way, the way a lock finally clicks open. I went home later quiet as a shadow, and Ethan wasn't there yet, so I walked to his study like I owned the place because I did, and I opened his laptop. Password was still his birthday, of course it was, and his email was open, and I started taking photos with my phone, not screenshots. I could accidentally leave traces of actual photos, the kind that feel old school and safe, email threads with Sloan. "Can't wait to see you tonight." Calendar entries that lined up perfectly with his late meetings, hotel reservations, jewelry charges I'd never received, and I kept breathing through the nausea, because this wasn't about feelings, now, it was about facts. I opened the safe, pulled out the prenup, photographed every page, zoomed in on that infidelity clause, until the text was crystal clear, and I put everything back exactly as it was, like I'd never been there. That night, Ethan slipped into bed and whispered, "I love you," and I stared into the dark, thinking you don't even know what love is, you just know ownership. And I felt this strange calm settle over me, because when you finally stop hoping someone will change, you get your power back. The next morning, Ethan left early, a note on his pillow, like he was some kind of charming husband. And I made coffee, worked out, took a shower, did all the normal things, and then I sat at my laptop and did what he thought I couldn't do. I opened our financial accounts. Ethan liked to pretend money was too complex for me, like I'd get confused by numbers. But the truth is, I have a business degree. I was never confused. I was just exhausted from fighting for basic respect. And that's where I found the second thing Ethan forgot, or never bothered to learn, before we got married, when WardShield was still a scrappy little startup, with more ambition than stability. I invested real money into it, $35,000 from my dad's life insurance payout. Not as a gift, as an investment, and my name was on the early paperwork as an initial investor. My hands went still on the keyboard when I saw it, because this wasn't just emotional betrayal anymore. This was financial reality, and if Ethan wanted to treat me like I was nothing, fine, but nothing doesn't show up on founding documents. Megan connected me with a divorce attorney named Renee Alvarez, the kind of woman who walks into a room and the air changes, silver hair, cut sharp red, suit eyes that miss nothing, and she flipped through my folder in silence, then tapped the prenup. "Infidelity clause is strong," she said, then tapped the investment documents. "This is stronger. It predates the prenup's separate claim." I asked, What does that mean? And Renee leaned back like she was calculating 10 moves ahead. It means leverage and it means timing. Your husband's planning an IPO. If you file now, he'll try to hide assets, move money, undervalue the company. If we wait until public filings and market valuation, hiding gets harder. I heard the number before I fully processed it, because she said it like it was ordinary. Your stake conservatively could be worth several million, possibly more, depending on valuation. And my brain flashed to that dinner where Ethan called me a bracelet. And I felt this almost dark satisfaction, not revenge, not yet just the simple fact that reality doesn't care what a man believes about you. Renee laid it out, calm and blunt. You need to act normal, gather evidence, keep a dated journal, move money slowly and legally into accounts in your name so you're protected. Don't drain anything, don't trigger alarms, and we keep collecting. I asked, for how long? And she said, about 6 months if the IPO timeline holds. 6 months sounded like a lifetime. 6 months of smiling across the table from a man who didn't deserve my kindness. 6 months of pretending I didn't know his assistant was his mistress. But then I imagined the alternative, walking away with scraps because I couldn't hold it together. And something in me hardened, so I said, okay. For weeks, my life became 2 lives in public. I played Ethan's perfect wife, charity events, polite lunches with other executives' spouses, little jokes, pretty dresses, calm voice, and in private. I was a quiet machine. I documented everything. I transferred money in small legal amounts into accounts. Renee set up for me labeled as donations, home improvements, investment allocations, all things a joint account holder has the right to do. And Ethan never noticed, because Ethan never looked. He was too busy being Ethan. Then he handed me a third piece of leverage. One night he left his laptop open on an email chain with his finance team, talk about aggressive projections and tightening numbers before filings. Nothing that screamed confession, but enough to smell like manipulation. And I photographed it and sent it to Renee, and she called me within the hour. This is useful, she said, not because we're trying to ruin him, but because it reminds him he can't play games in a negotiation. And then because life loves irony, Sloane started flashing expensive jewelry and driving a brand new SUV like she was a CEO, and my gut told me something was off, so I mentioned it, and Renee had a forensic accountant quietly look into it. The report came back, and I read it twice because it was so absurd, it almost felt fake. Sloane had been embezzling from WardShield for over a year, false expense reports, diverted payments, unauthorized transfers, hundreds of thousands of dollars. And I laughed once, short and sharp, because of course she was the mistress stealing from the man who thought he was untouchable. You can't write it cleaner than that. Renee's response was simple. We sit on it, let her dig deeper when the time comes. It's leverage on top of leverage. Around that time, I ran into one of Ethan's clients at a gala, and he told me sincerely, your husband's lucky beauty and brains, and I almost didn't know what to do with that sentence because I'd been living in Ethan's version of reality for so long, the one where I was just decoration. But that man handed me his card and asked if I'd ever consider consulting work, and my heart kicked because it was proof my life could exist outside Ethan's shadow. And then Mr. Ishida, the investor from that first dinner, pulled me aside at another event weeks later and said quietly, I decided not to invest. Your husband's comments troubled me. Character matters. And something in my chest loosened because I wasn't crazy. What Ethan did wasn't normal, successful man behavior. It was ugly, and at least one person in his world saw it for what it was. The twist, the moment that changed everything, came sooner than I expected. Ethan invited me to another dinner with Japanese partners. Same restaurant, same private room, like he wanted to replay the night he thought he won. And that morning he said casually, just smile like I was a hired actress. I put on a green dress, did my hair, did my makeup, And I walked into that room looking exactly like the trophy wife he believed I was, and then I bowed properly, and in fluent Japanese, I greeted the guests, warm, confident professional, and Ethan's face drained so fast he looked sick. One of the executives lit up, the other leaned forward, and suddenly I wasn't Ethan's accessory anymore. I was the person in the room who could actually connect, who could translate culture, nuance, meaning. And for the rest of dinner, I spoke naturally, switching between Japanese and English, answering questions, talking business, talking ethics. And every time Ethan tried to oversell his company with that shiny, too-perfect pitch, I added gentle clarifications in Japanese that made the partners nod thoughtfully, not sabotage, just honesty, the kind Ethan didn't understand because he'd been building his life on performance. When we left, the partners bowed to me with real respect, and to Ethan, they gave that polite distance people give when they've seen something they don't like but won't say out loud. In the parking lot, Ethan grabbed my arm, not hard enough to bruise, but hard enough to remind me he still thought he owned the moment, and he hissed, "What the hell was that? You made me look stupid." I looked at his hand on my arm until he let go, then I said, "Calm. I didn't make you look anything." "Ethan, you did that yourself." He started in with the indignation. "Since when do you speak Japanese? Since when do you know anything about my business?" And I felt this quiet, steady heat rise, not messy rage, not tears, just truth, so I said, "I've always spoken Japanese. I've always had a business degree, you just never bothered to notice." His mouth opened like he had a comeback ready, but I cut straight through him. "I heard you," and his face changed instantly. Confusion to caution to fear. "What are you talking about?" he asked, and I said, "That first dinner when you called me a bracelet, when you told Mr. Ishida about Sloan, when you said I was stupid and useless, and the prenup would leave me with nothing." I understood every word. For a second, he looked like a man standing on a trapdoor that just opened, and then he tried to scramble. I didn't mean it. I was trying to impress a client, and I laughed bitter. "You meant every word, you just didn't mean for me to hear it." He went for the power play. "You can't divorce me, the prenup." And I said void infidelity clause, and his jaw clenched. "You can't prove," and I tilted my head. "Emails, calendar, hotel receipts, charges. And by the way, I invested in WardShield before we even married. Renee ran the numbers, my stake plus half the marital assets." It's not small. That's when the panic hit his eyes, because Ethan didn't care that he hurt me. He cared that I could cost him something. And he said, "That could ruin the IPO," like I was supposed to feel sorry for him, and I shrugged. "You should have thought of that before you built your life on lies." I got into my car and drove to a hotel suite I'd already booked under my maiden name because I stopped doing spontaneous the day I realized being unprepared is how men like Ethan keep you trapped. I called Renee and said, "File," and she said, "Already in motion, one more question. Do you want the embezzlement report sent to the board?" And I stared at the city lights, thinking about every time I'd swallowed my voice to keep the peace. Every time I'd made myself smaller, so Ethan could feel bigger, and I said, "Want it." After that, everything moved like dominoes. Sloan was fired within days. The board launched an investigation. Ethan's IPO timeline got paused, which is rich people language for panic. And Ethan's calls started coming from random numbers, voicemails bouncing between rage and pleading. "We can fix this, you're being irrational." "Come home," and I blocked them all, because my life was not a negotiation anymore. His lawyer got polite fast, suddenly. Ethan wanted to talk like adults. Suddenly, he was willing to be fair. Funny how respectful a man gets when your pain turns into paperwork. The divorce process wasn't glamorous. It was meetings, documents, signatures, stress moments, where I sat alone in a quiet room and felt the weight of 5 years settling on my shoulders. But it was also the first time in a long time I could breathe without performing. I moved into a place I chose myself, not a glass mansion built to impress strangers, just a clean, calm apartment, where my name on the mailbox felt like ownership of my own life. And I started taking consulting calls from companies that actually cared about ethics and culture. Not because Ethan allowed it, because I wanted it. And every time I walked into a meeting and someone listened to me, really listened, I felt the old version of me peeling away. Here's the part that still sits heavy sometimes, though, because the investigation didn't just hit Ethan and Sloan, it shook the company, and I heard some regular employees lost bonuses, people who didn't cheat, didn't steal, didn't call anyone a bracelet. They still felt the ripple, and I won't pretend that doesn't bother me. So I want to ask you something honestly. Where do you draw the line? If exposing the truth brings justice but also creates collateral damage for innocent people, is it still the right move, or does protecting bystanders matter more than making sure the guilty face consequences? Drop your take in the comments, because I know people have strong opinions about this. And if you've ever been underestimated, dismissed, or treated like you were just decoration, tell me what you would have done in my place. Would you have blown it up immediately? Or played it quiet and strategic like I did? And if you want more real stories like this, the kind where the quiet one finally stops swallowing their truth, hit like, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs a reminder that being underestimated is sometimes the biggest advantage you'll ever get.